I came home late that evening, exhausted and ready to collapse onto the couch. My boots thudded against the wooden floor as I walked inside, dropping my work bag by the door. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the dryer in the laundry room. The air smelled like fresh detergent, and I guessed Emily, my wife, had been doing laundry again. She always liked keeping the house tidy, even when I told her there wasn't any need to fuss so much. It was just the two of us. I made my way to the living room, pulling off my jacket as I walked. When I reached the laundry basket by the door, something caught my eye. Sitting right on top of the neatly folded clothes was a gray hoodie. I paused, staring at it for a moment. It wasn't mine. I leaned down, picking it up and turning it over in my hands. It felt worn, the kind of hoodie someone might throw on for errands or a quick jog. The logo on the front was unfamiliar, and the smell, faint but distinct, wasn't my cologne or Emily's floral detergent. It smelled like sweat and cheap cologne, a sharp mix that made my stomach twist. I frowned. Emily didn't wear anything like this. She liked colorful blouses and clean lines, not plain gray hoodies. "Emily?" I called out, walking toward the kitchen. Her voice came from behind the counter, light and cheerful. "Yeah? What's up?" I stepped into the kitchen and held up the hoodie. She was rinsing dishes, her hair tied back, a smile on her face. "Whose is this?" I asked. She glanced at the hoodie briefly and shrugged. "Oh, that's Kyle's," she said casually. "I must have tossed it in the wash by accident." "Kyle?" My brow furrowed. "Since when does Kyle leave his clothes here?" Emily chuckled, her tone light. "He's been helping with a few things around the house while you're at work. You know, stuff like moving furniture and fixing that loose cabinet door." Kyle was our neighbor, a guy in his mid-20s who was always looking for side jobs. I'd seen him mowing lawns and painting fences around the neighborhood, but I didn't remember agreeing to have him work at our house. "Really?" I said slowly. "I don't remember us talking about that." Emily waved it off like it was nothing. "I figured you wouldn't mind. You've been so busy, and I didn't want to bother you with little things like this." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her tone was too smooth, like she'd practiced this answer before. I nodded, tossing the hoodie back into the laundry basket. "I'll take it back to him tomorrow." "No, don't worry about it," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "I'll give it to him next time I see him." Her reaction made my unease grow. I shrugged, pretending not to care, but the feeling lingered. Emily wasn't the type to lie, and Kyle didn't seem like a threat. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that something about this was off. Later that night, as I sat on the couch with a beer, I stared at the laundry basket from across the room. The gray hoodie sat there like a silent accusation, its presence too loud to ignore. It was just a hoodie, right? Nothing to overthink. But my gut told me there was more to this than Emily was letting on. And this was only the beginning. The unease I felt that night didn't fade. In fact, it grew. The gray hoodie, her casual tone, and the way she had brushed it off, it all stayed in my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself I was being paranoid. Emily had never given me a reason to doubt her, and Kyle, well, he was just a kid looking for work. But over the next few days, I started noticing things. The first thing that struck me was how often Kyle's truck was parked out front. I'd pull into the driveway after work and see it there, the hood still warm from a recent drive. I wasn't the type to monitor Emily's every move, but the frequency of his visits felt excessive. One evening, I got home earlier than usual. As I parked, I saw Mrs. Clark, our elderly neighbor, waving at me from across the street. She was the kind of woman who knew everything happening in the neighborhood before anyone else did. "Your wife sure is keeping Kyle busy these days," she said with a sly grin. Her words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping out of the car. "Oh, I just see his truck here a lot," she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "He must be very helpful. Such a nice boy, isn't he?" I forced a smile and nodded, but my stomach churned. Mrs. Clark had a way of turning small things into gossip, but her observation stuck with me. I muttered a polite goodbye and walked into the house, determined not to let her words get to me. When I stepped inside, the smell of something sweet lingered in the air, perfume, but not Emily's usual one. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch with her legs tucked under her, scrolling through her phone. She was wearing fitted jeans and a bright blouse, the kind of outfit she used to wear when we were dating. "You're home early," she said, looking up with a surprised smile. I glanced around the room. On the coffee table was an open soda can, the logo unfamiliar. Next to it, a pair of work gloves sat neatly folded, too large to be Emily's. "What's Kyle been working on today?" I asked casually, keeping my tone light. Emily hesitated for just a moment before responding. "Oh, just fixing the garden trellis. It's been wobbly for months, remember?" I nodded, but the discomfort in my chest tightened. She sounded so casual, so unbothered, like having Kyle around was the most normal thing in the world. That night, as we sat together watching TV, I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to her phone, which lay face down on the armrest next to her. She didn't pick it up once, not even during commercials. Normally, she'd be scrolling through social media or texting friends, but tonight she seemed overly careful. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She was laughing at the show, her face lit by the glow of the screen. For a moment, I felt guilty. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe there was nothing wrong, and I was letting my imagination run wild. But then, she got up to grab something from the kitchen, and her phone buzzed. I didn't look at it, didn't need to. The slight twitch of her lips when she glanced at it told me enough. She was smiling. A few more days passed, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every little thing seemed to confirm my fears. Emily was distant, yet she acted overly cheerful whenever Kyle came up in conversation. Her phone was almost always face down, and when she thought I wasn't looking, she would check it with a faint smile on her lips. Then came the day that broke everything. I got off work early that evening, something that didn't happen often. As I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was Kyle's truck parked a few houses down. It was unusual. He normally parked right in front of our house. A part of me wanted to shrug it off, but I couldn't ignore the way my chest tightened as I stepped out of the car. The house was quiet when I walked in. Too quiet. I set my bag down and called out, "Emily?" No response. I walked through the house, my boots thudding softly against the hardwood floor. The air felt heavy, like it was holding a secret I wasn't meant to discover. As I passed the kitchen, I noticed 2 glasses on the counter, one half full with wine, the other empty. The unease that had been gnawing at me for days suddenly roared to life. Then I heard it. Faint laughter, coming from the backyard. My heart pounded as I moved toward the patio door, my hands trembling. The curtains were slightly drawn, but through the gap, I could see them. Emily was sitting on the bench near the garden trellis, her body angled toward Kyle. She was laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Kyle leaned in closer, saying something I couldn't hear, and she didn't pull away. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to do something, to throw open the door, to yell, to demand answers, but my body wouldn't move. Then it happened. Kyle reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear, and she smiled at him. Not the polite kind of smile you give to a neighbor or a friend, but the kind of smile that held history. A secret. And then she kissed him. It wasn't a quick peck, or some misunderstanding I could lie to myself about. It was slow, deliberate, filled with an intimacy that cut through me like a blade. Her hands slid up his chest, and he pulled her closer, their bodies fitting together like they'd done this 100 times before. I staggered back, the world tilting beneath me. My stomach churned, and my chest felt like it was caving in. Everything I'd been trying to ignore, every doubt I'd tried to silence, came crashing down in that moment. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal. I snapped photos of the messages, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and vindication. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was proof. Step 5, setting the stage. With the evidence in hand, I started preparing for the fallout. I sent copies of the messages and video clips to Mark, asking him to hold on to them in case I needed backup. Then, I started thinking about how to expose them in a way they couldn't recover from. I wasn't just going to confront Emily. I was going to make sure everyone knew what she'd done. The first move was sending the evidence to Kyle's parents. They were good people, the kind who didn't tolerate dishonesty or disrespect. I attached the screenshots and videos to an email, keeping the message short and to the point. I thought you should know what your son has been doing in my house with my wife. I hope you'll handle this as you see fit. Then, I started reaching out to the neighbors. Not all of them, just the ones who mattered. People like Mrs. Clark, who would spread the word faster than wildfire. I didn't give them all the details, just enough to plant the seed. By the time I finished, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The pieces were in place. All that was left was to watch it unfold. 2 days later, the stage was set. The evidence had been sent, the whispers had started, and now it was time for Emily to face the truths she'd been hiding, or so she thought. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but Emily was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she wiped the counter. She looked so calm, like everything was perfectly normal. It made my stomach churn. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment. So, I said casually, how's Kyle doing these days? Her hand froze for a fraction of a second, then continued wiping. She turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Same as always. Busy helping out around the neighborhood. I stepped into the kitchen, folding my arms. He's been spending a lot of time here, though. Almost feels like he's part of the family. Emily let out a short laugh, but there was a slight edge to it. Don't be ridiculous. He's just helping with things around the house. You know how busy you are. I tilted my head, studying her. Right. Like fixing the trellis, and the sink, and whatever else you've been coming up with. Her smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms defensively. What are you getting at? I took a deep breath, my voice steady. I know, Emily. I know what's been going on with you and Kyle. Her face turned pale, and for a moment she looked like she might deny it. But then, as if flipping a switch, she went on the attack. You've been spying on me? She snapped, her voice rising. That's insane, Adam. You're paranoid. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery, scrolling to one of the videos. Without a word, I pressed play and set it on the counter. The screen showed her and Kyle in the living room, sitting too close, her hand brushing his as they laughed. Her jaw tightened, her eyes darting between me and the phone. It's not what it looks like, she said quickly, her voice shaking. Oh, really? I said, my tone icy. Because it looks like my wife has been sneaking around with the neighbor while I've been at work. She let out a bitter laugh, throwing her hands up. It was just a kiss, Adam. It didn't mean anything. The words hit me like a slap, but I didn't let it show. I leaned in closer, my voice low and controlled. Just a kiss? Do you really think I'm that stupid? I've seen the messages, Emily. I've seen the videos. Don't insult me by pretending this was nothing. Her defensiveness crumbled, replaced by anger. Maybe if you weren't so distant all the time, I wouldn't have needed someone else to pay attention to me, she shot back. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. So this is my fault? I work long hours to give us a good life, and this is how you repay me? By bringing him into our home, into my space? She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. You're not perfect, Adam. You're always tired, always distracted. Kyle made me feel alive, something you haven't done in years. Her words cut deep, but I didn't let her see it. Instead, I nodded slowly, stepping back. You know what, Emily? You're right. I haven't been paying enough attention to you. But that ends now. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means you're leaving, I said flatly. I've already packed your things. They're by the front door. The locks are being changed tomorrow. She gaped at me, her composure finally cracking. You can't do this. This is my house too. I shook my head. Not anymore. I have all the evidence I need to make sure you get nothing in the divorce. So you can either leave now, or I can call the police and have them escort you out. Your choice. For a moment I thought she might argue, but then she turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen. I heard her grab the duffel bag I had left by the door and slam it against the floor. The sound of the door slamming behind her was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. The fallout begins. That night, I sent a follow-up email to Kyle's parents with the additional proof I'd gathered. By the next morning, word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mrs. Clark gave me a knowing nod as I grabbed the mail, and another neighbor, Mr. Hughes, shot me a sympathetic look as I drove past. Kyle's parents showed up at my door that evening, their faces a mix of anger and shame. "We had no idea," his father said, his voice tight. "We're so sorry, Adam. He won't be coming around anymore." I thanked them, though the satisfaction I felt was hollow. This was just the beginning. The morning after Emily left, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. The proof I had shared had done its job. Everywhere I went, I could feel the weight of people's stares. Some looked at me with sympathy. Others avoided my gaze altogether, perhaps embarrassed for having witnessed the collapse of something they thought was solid. I sat on the porch with a coffee, staring at the quiet street. I thought about how quickly everything had unraveled. Just a few weeks ago, I was coming home to a house I thought was full of love. Now, all I could see were the cracks I had ignored for far too long. Around noon, Kyle's parents showed up again, this time with Kyle in tow. His father's expression was hard, his jaw tight with restrained fury. His mother looked like she'd been crying. Kyle, on the other hand, stood stiffly behind them, his head lowered but his posture defensive. "Adam," Mr. Tanner said, his voice steady but cold. "We've spoken to Kyle, and he has something to say." Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie, the same gray hoodie that had started this entire mess. He looked at me for a brief second before glancing away. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his tone anything but sincere. I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. "That's it?" I asked. "You humiliated me in my own home, disrespected my marriage, and all you've got is a half-hearted sorry?" Kyle's face flushed, but before he could say anything, his father cut in. "He knows he screwed up. Believe me, Adam, we're not letting him walk away from this unscathed." Mrs. Tanner stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We're so ashamed of him. Please know that we had no idea. He's been told he's no longer welcome under our roof until he takes responsibility for his actions." Kyle's head shot up at that, his eyes wide with panic. "What? You're kicking me out? Over this?" His father turned to him, his voice rising for the first time. "You don't get to act like this and face no consequences, Kyle. You've embarrassed this family, hurt people who trusted you, and made a fool of yourself. You need to grow up." Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but his father's glare silenced him. I stood silently, watching the scene unfold, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't my job to fix Kyle, that was on him and his parents, but seeing him face some consequences felt like a small victory. As they turned to leave, Mr. Tanner paused. "I hope this gives you some peace, Adam. You didn't deserve any of this." I nodded, muttering a quiet thanks. As they walked back to their car, I watched Kyle climb in, his head hung low, his arrogance finally stripped away. Emily's isolation. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Emily tried calling me multiple times, leaving voicemails filled with apologies and excuses. I didn't answer. I didn't need to hear her voice, didn't want to listen to her try and twist the blame back onto me. Through mutual friends, I learned that she was staying with a distant cousin in another town. She had become a pariah in the neighborhood, shunned by the very people she used to charm. Mrs. Clark, of course, was at the center of it all, sharing the story over coffee with anyone who would listen. I didn't mind. If Emily wanted attention, she was getting it, just not the kind she liked. The neighborhood speaks. One evening, I bumped into Mr. Hughes while taking out the trash. He gave me a small nod before speaking. "Tough break, Adam," he said. "But I've got to say, you handled it better than most people would have." "Thanks," I replied, not really knowing what else to say. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "People around here know what kind of man you are. You're respected, and you'll come out of this stronger. Don't let what she did define you." His words stuck with me long after he walked away. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of humiliation was lifting, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild. The realization. That night, as I sat on the couch with a beer in hand, I thought about everything I had lost, and everything I had gained. Emily's betrayal had broken me in ways I didn't think were possible, but it had also forced me to confront truths I had been avoiding for years. I had spent so much of my life working, trying to provide, thinking that was enough. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had lost in the process. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was a chance to start over. The day I decided to sell the house felt like closing a chapter one had been clinging to for too long. It wasn't an easy decision. This was the home where I had imagined building a future, where I had invested time, money, and love. But now, it was just a shelf filled with memories I didn't want to carry anymore. I called a real estate agent and started packing. The process was slow, each box filled with pieces of a life I was leaving behind. As I went through old photos and keepsakes, I found myself smiling at some of the good times Emily and I had shared. Those moments weren't lies. They were just part of a story that had reached its end. A fresh start. By the time the house sold, I had already found a smaller place on the other side of town. It wasn't as polished, but it was mine. There were no ghosts of betrayal lurking in the corners, no reminders of what I had lost. The first night in my new home, I sat on the floor with a pizza box and a cold beer, looking around at the blank walls. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Rebuilding myself. I started focusing on things I had neglected for years. I dusted off my gym membership and began working out again, finding that the physical exertion helped clear my mind. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my marriage. One night, Mark invited me over for drinks in his garage. As we sat in the dim light, surrounded by the smell of oil and old tools, he looked at me with a knowing smile. "You're doing better," he said simply. I nodded. "Yeah. I am. Good. Because you deserve better than what she gave you. Don't forget that." His words stuck with me. For too long, I had let Emily's actions make me feel small, but now, I was starting to see my own worth again. Emily's last attempt. A few weeks after moving, Emily tried reaching out one final time. She sent a long email filled with apologies and justifications. She wrote about how lonely she had been, how she had felt neglected, how Kyle had been a mistake. I read it once, then deleted it. There was no point in responding. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. Closure and growth. One evening, as I sat on my new porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, it had all been overwhelming. But now, as the cool breeze brushed against my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. This wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life I could rebuild. I wasn't the same person I had been before Emily's betrayal. I was stronger now, more self-aware. And while the scars she left would always be a part of me, they didn't have to define me. The final twist. A few days later, I bumped into Mrs. Clark while running errands. She greeted me with her usual sly smile, but there was a twinkle of curiosity in her eyes. "You hear about Kyle?" she asked, leaning in conspiratorially. "No," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Apparently he's moved away. His parents cut him off completely. Word is, he's been crashing on friends' couches, trying to pick up odd jobs. Seems like life's catching up with him." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. Justice had a funny way of finding people. "And Emily?" she continued. "I heard she's still staying with that cousin of hers." She's not exactly welcome around here anymore. I thanked her and walked away, feeling lighter with every step. Emily and Kyle's choices had brought them to where they were now, and I had no interest in looking back. A message for the future. That night, I sat on my new couch, flipping through a photo album I had almost thrown away during the move. The memories no longer hurt. They were just reminders of a chapter one had closed. I raised a toast to myself, the man I was becoming. And as the quiet filled the room, I realized I didn't need answers from Emily or apologies from Kyle. I had already won. Final note for the audience. Life has a way of testing us, but the truth always comes out. And sometimes, losing something can be the start of finding yourself again. Subscribe for more stories where justice and karma take center stage.